So hello everyone and welcome to this session on how is data analytics shaping the subscription economy. My name is Parag and I work as a product marketer at Hevo. So I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. First of all, I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us today and special thanks to our panelists. Before we start this session, I would like to remind you of a few things. So all attendees will be on listen only mode. We'll be recording this session and we'll send you the recording via email. If you have any questions during the session, you can just type your questions in the Q&A window available on your screen, and then we will address them one by one at the end of the session. So let me first give you a quick intro about our company. So Hevo is a no-code data pipeline platform that helps businesses integrate their data silos and provides analytics ready data in minutes. So it basically helps you connect, transform and load your data spread across 100 plus data sources. That includes databases, SaaS applications, cloud storages, streaming services, so on and so forth. All this data into a centralized storage, which is typically a data warehouse, and you can easily connect and analyze it in any BI tool of your choice. So for more details about the product, you can visit our website, which is www.hevodata.com, and sign up for a free trial there. Now with this introduction, let me introduce you to our panel. I'm gonna take a peek at my notes here to be sure that I have everyone's bio properly stated as we go along. So we have Arpit Agrawal. Thank you, Arpit, for joining us today. Arpit is a VP of Analytics and Data Science at Khatabook. He has over 10 plus years of experience across multiple sectors like shared mobility, fashion, retail, insurance, and technology. He's known for his work in the areas of dynamic pricing, funnel optimization, IoT analytics, customer retention, and hyperlocal geo-based analytics. Prior to Khatabook, he has worked with Zoomcar, Cartesian Consulting, New Sigma, and Oracle in the capacity of analytics of an analytics leader. He's the person behind envisioning and developing India's first driving scoring mechanism, which aims at building a safer driving ecosystem on Indian roads. He has also pioneered the NPS rollout across the fashion retail industry in India. He's also a regular contributor at data science and AI conferences across India and abroad. So welcome, Arpit.
Thank
Our
you.
panelist is Chandramani Tiwari, is a co-founder of GTM Buddy and former head of data science at Zomato. So he has a proven record of creating the vision and roadmap and owning execution of data intelligence initiatives at multiple organizations. So he has vast experience in building data science teams from scratch. At GTM Buddy, he's currently reimagining and building the next generation sales effectiveness product. Prior to GTM Buddy, he was heading the data science and data engineering function at Hyperpure. So Hyperpure is an initiative by Zomato to provide fresh, hygienic, high quality ingredients and supplies to restaurants across India. So he spearheaded the data initiative and worked on driving growth and process automation at Hyperpure. Prior to Zomato, he has been a part of 0 to 1 and 1 to 100 million ARR journey at Gainsight. He was a founding member there and a head of the data science team at Gainsight. There he hired, mentored, and led a team of 12 data scientists, data engineers, and software engineers. He has defined and developed product analytics framework across multiple organizations to support data-driven decisions like defining North Star metrics, identifying greenfield opportunities, vectors driving adoption, or leading to churn. All right, so now with this introduction, we will move on to the topic of this discussion. I mean, we all know how the subscription business has boomed up In fact, we all use multiple subscription in our everyday life. They can be in the form of a newspaper that we receive every day, or a Netflix account we binge watch, or a pure water that we drink, or even a Zoom car that we drive, and the list goes on. So the SaaS model has supercharged the subscription economy recently, and we have seen its impact across multiple sectors, including air travel, uh, agriculture, be it electronics, fashion, consumer business, and many others. We have seen the global shift towards the subscription business that is being driven by the changing customer preferences, expectations, and the healthy recurring revenue. The subscription business in India today has reported a growth of over 300% in the last 7 years. Um, yeah, that's a phenomenal growth that we have seen, and it's going to take it's going to grow more in the near future, considering that the digital adoption has been on the rise. So our today's panelists are Arpit and Chandramani. Both have experience working in the traditional as well as subscription based businesses. So I would like to start this discussion by asking an open ended question to both of you, Arpit and Chandramani. So, what's your take on the subscription business model? Is it good, bad, or ugly as compared to the perpetual model? And what are the major differences that you see in these two pricing models? Maybe Arpit, you can start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been advocate of subscription businesses because when I was working Zoomka before Khatabog, so we had launched a car subscription business which did not exist in India till then, and it was a very unique model where you can subscribe a car instead of buying it, pay a monthly fee, and then you can terminate the subscription whenever you want. There were some lock-in periods like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, but it gave you a lot of first of all, it saved a lot of money for you. You don't have to pay a huge amount of down payment and EMI, and you can change your cars very frequently as and when new cars come in the market. So that was my background of subscription business in the Indian economy. Now when we evaluate, you asked a question that is it good, bad, or ugly. So my take on subscription business is that subscription business is a win-win deal. Okay, so I would categorize it as good. Why good? Because it is good for both parties. So for example, let's see it from a business point of view. If you see from a business point of view, why is it good for a business? Is because they have to acquire a customer once, and then there's a longer period of lock-in. So the business gets money in advance most of the times. Either they would have a security deposit, like in Zoomcar you used to take a security deposit plus some fee, and that we would refund at the end. And some businesses like Amazon Prime or consumer subscription businesses take the complete fee of the whole year in advance, like 999 pack, 399 pack. So for a business it's extremely good, right? They are kind of booking their revenues earlier, on which they can also earn money. How is it good for the customers? Is because they get goods at a very cheap rate, right? So so they do not have to, if they buy the same thing like month on month, as if you compare like monthly packs as compared to yearly packs, you will see there's a big delta in prices, and that is what drives the Indian economy. That I do not have to think about it again and again every month, should I buy it or not? Some months I'll forget it and I'll face problems with my subscription, and it's better to buy it at one go. So that is why I would categorize it as good, and it's a win-win deal for both parties, right? So now you also talked about what are the top differences between traditional business and subscription business.
Right.
So just a little before we move on to money, just a little light on that. So in traditional business, it's more about like paper item, right? So that you buy some good and you pay for that on the spot. Now, in this, there are obviously pros and cons. The pros is obviously for the customer, that the customer does not have to buy in bulk, right? For not for every business, it can be sold in bulk. Now, when I say bulk, it can be number of items or it can be the tenure for which you're buying it, right? So it gives a customer more flexibility. So traditional business is a little more flexible than a subscription business. Subscription business are only suited for those things which have a very high repeat usage. as compared to a traditional business. So, and subscription business and traditional business also cater to a larger mass market as compared to subscription business. Subscription business, obviously, not everyone would have that amount of money to prepay for it. So that is why, in terms of demographic, it kind of skews. If you see from a cost of acquisition, you will see that the subscription business would give you better returns over lifetime if you see cost of acquisition per amount of, per dollar earned for the company. Because for a traditional business, you have to retain the customer every time the customer come, and there's a cost, either a performance marketing cost for the first time or a re-engagement cost to make the customer repeat, right?
Right.
Whereas for subscription business, the cost might be higher initially, but over time it will become marginally lower than your traditional business cost of acquisition, right? So the effort is also less in terms of retention. Now, on the other side, when you say in the subscription business, so the customer effort reduces. Now let's talk about subscription businesses like Big Basket, right? Big Basket has a, BB daily service in which they deliver milk or eggs or breads to you at a day level, and you can just keep it on. That's a daily lead, and you don't have to order it again and again. So that is where subscription businesses work the most, where you can foresee that you need it on a very regular basis, and you can just switch on a button, pay for it, and it keeps on recurring. Yeah. So for me, these are the key differences, and let's move on to money.
Sure. Mani, your thoughts, please.
Sure. Yeah. So the points that Arpit put forward definitely resonate, and I agree with that. So I will mostly, rather repeating the points, I will just add on to that. So there are few challenges with subscription businesses also, right? And those challenges by themselves actually lead to the health of the ecosystem. So for example, as Arpit mentioned, the customer acquisition cost. So depending upon the domain that you play in, let's assume my area of expertise, SaaS, software as a service, B2B softwares, so there the customer acquisition as well as the retention costs are pretty high. Um, and the lifetime value of the customer will depend upon how long can you continue the relationship. And that's where
Right.
that whole ecosystem is driven by this factor. So if you take traditional business, and let's take software as an example, I will say Microsoft Office. Earlier you used to pay once, use it. They have transitions to Office 365. What are the challenges? A subscriber can always every year say, I want to move to Google's offering or some other offering, right? So that focus on actually retaining customers and the product, the organization giving the offering as a subscription has to double down on the value prop, right? And that laser focus actually leads to the health of business. So that's one point I would like to add. The differences in traditional versus a subscription model also arise because of that. Is that to get the lifetime value, which is higher than your customer acquisition cost and your running cost, so that you make a profit, keeps organizations razor focused on focusing on customer success. So if you we all are aware, right, in the last 10 years, as the SaaS and subscription economy has started growing, customer success came out as a function itself. It did not exist 10 years back. Why was that? That whole idea of focusing on customer success so that you can drive retention renewals has actually led to a lot of disruption as well as growth of the industry. So right now, for software providers, SaaS businesses, the NPSs are trending upwards, and these are because of the fundamental difference in the and the challenges of the subscription business, which is leading to this growth.
Absolutely. All right. So now, just one more question on the similar lines. So as we are comparing these two models, so I would just like to understand, like, what are the key metrics that you regularly track, apart from, like, for subscription business, we regularly track MRR, LTVs, and churn rate. So with respect to the metrics that you track uh, on a regular basis, what do you think has changed, and what are the key metrics that you sort of monitor on day-to-day basis?
Sure. So, like growth, retention, these numbers, as you mentioned, are the bread and butter. But what drives each of this is your adoption scores. So, if your software is adopted or if your offering is adopted, that would lead to higher retention, upsells, and all of those things, right? So one of the metrics that has started gaining traction would be around adoption, laser focus on whether the customer is driving value from your product or your offering. So having adoption, having north star metrics defined. Okay, if this metric is above this threshold, that means the customer is actually getting value from my offering. So focus on that. And if you see the trends, product experience has again started coming up, right? Last 5 years or last 3 years, product experience after customer experience has started coming up. So one metric which is tracking and becoming very important would be around adoption. Again, adoption metric would be different depending upon the offering that you have, but I see that becoming apart from MRR, growth retentions, gross retention, right, net retentions, the adoption metrics become very important.
Sure. So what's your take
Just
on?
to add on to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just adding on to Mani has talked about, right? So two more metrics I would like to talk about apart from the customer experience metric and adoption metric that Mani talked about are, one is the frequency of usage that we track very often, because at the end what you want is that the customer should buy the subscription again or renew the subscription, right? If that kind of doesn't happen, at the end of the day, subscription is also not successful in longer run. So we have figured out that first thing is what Mani talked about, customer experience, and second is frequency of usage is a very strong, driver of renewal rates. So, for example, say it's a Netflix. So, how often are you watching Netflix? What is the average days gap between you watch Netflix in a month? How many times you log in? What is the watch time of doing that? So, these are some metrics to correlate. Another metric, that we have identified as important is your time to subscribe. For example, the first time I generate a lead for a subscriber to the time I convert, this kind of tells you that how long is your conversion cycles for subscription, and the longer your conversion cycles are, the higher is your cost of acquisition for the company. So you need to figure out how you are spending your money, which channels are outperforming as compared to other channels, and how can I make the time to conversion as less as possible. So yeah, so these two are also important according to me.
True.
Sure. Now moving on. So I would like to understand, like Arpit, you have worked with Zoomcar, and Mani, you have worked with Zomato and Gainsight. So there, I would like to understand who are the producers and consumers of data within your organization, and what data do they produce, and how do they consume it?
Okay. So maybe I'll go. Let's talk about the producers of data. So
Mhm.
primarily the producers of data are the customers of our service. Okay. So for example, either we have say Amazon Prime or Netflix or Hotstar or Zoomcar car subscription or Big Basket. At the end of the day, the data has been produced by the customer because they use the app. They give feedback to the business that what are they using, which product they are selecting or subscribing to, how we talked about customer experience, we talked about frequency of usage. Everything is generated by the customers, right? But there is also some data that is generated by the businesses. A couple of them are, for example, outbound calls. So when I call the customer to take some feedback, right, that is data generated by the business. And on similar lines, surveys, right? So even though it is filled by them, but we initiated it. So you can say you are a co-producer of the data.
Right.
And from a consumption side is mostly the businesses itself, because we analyze the data and try to find patterns and take out customer insights to improve our products. Yeah, so I would say if there were two different bifurcations, then primarily the producers are customers and consumers are business. But yeah, there are either ways also in some cases.
Right.
Yep, definitely. From data generation, again, definitely it's the adoption metrics that you are looking at. So whatever the consumers are or your user customers are using your product, your offering, that particular data is produced mostly would be customer and consumer facing. Again, survey, NPS, these kind of information, additional sources of data. From a consumption perspective, at the organization that I have worked with, businesses remain definitely one of the biggest consumers. So it could be like information like health scores and tracking which customers are likely to renew, which are likely to churn, uh, and data around like the actual growth signals that come up. Apart from that, product teams and engineering teams also are big consumers of data. Let's assume that a product team is responsible for developing uh, a product and leading it to success. So they look at that option data, figure out what new, if a new feature has been rolled out, what is the NPS for that, what is the survey score for that, uh, how is that option tracking for that. So product team, engineering teams become big consumers. In business, you have marketing who can do data driven campaigns based upon the data that they see. You have a sales team using that, renewal team using that. So primarily, these would be the patterns of consumption and creation of data.
Sure. And then what are the tools and techniques or platforms maybe that you use for storing, processing your data and making it available to all the teams across the organizations for maybe for their projects or analysis?
Yeah, so tool, it varies across organization use cases, but the overall trend is around building centralized repositories, right? And that's where you have typically some kind of data lake or data warehouse that you want to create, right? So it is a very hybrid kind of ecosystems. So many data where you do not need online retrieval, but mostly data processing. The trend is to use leverage S3, Glacier to bring down the cost, right? So you store your data into columnar format in files, have open source tools like Presto, SQL, interact with them, and then you run your dashboards, analytic queries on that. There can be many different ways of doing that, but I'm saying that at least people, if they are choosing to build systems now that focus on using files and columnar storage, is trending upward. And then you also need data which needs to be used almost in real time or online. So for that you have databases that are mostly used, or caches that would be used. So typically it will be depending upon what kind of access you want, offline, online. People have started investing in feature stores. If you have online machine learning models, so you need feature stores actually to get the pre-aggregated data that the models need. So that would be there. In terms of tools also, like ETL, earlier it used to be on-premise, Informatica and Talent. That has also started moving to the cloud. So you have, I think, companies like yours, and then even Informatica and all of have uh, SaaS offerings, cloud offerings too. They have too. So you definitely need an ETL tool to actually get combine the data. But the trend would be have a centralized location where you can get all the data, join them, have some kind of a distinction between offline and online access. Offline accesses are cheaper, right? So that's why you want to keep them there, and online access would be a bit costlier. And that is the kind of trend that is evolving right now.
Sure.
Yeah, and a couple of more points here. So what I have realized is to use the data more effectively to drive growth. Data democratization is important. So sometimes what happens is, say, the analytics team or the data science team would be very hands-on with the data, and they would, centrally know the insights. But it's also important for, say, the product managers or the growth marketing managers to explore data on themselves. So any tool that kind of helps them explore themselves and validate their hypothesis are important. For example, we use a lot of tools which give you like on the fly analytics. And some examples of tools are, say, Clever Tap Analytics, Amplitude, right? And there are other tools also where people can, it's so easy that people, the whole database is exposed and you can just, build charts, funnels, retention funnels and everything. So this is one of the things that I've realized is a key to driving growth and taking fast actions and insights.
Definitely agree.
I would like to understand like how do you use your subscribers data to effectively drive business growth and reduce the churn rate. Maybe Arpit, you can give a perspective like how you used to do at Zoomcar.
Yeah. So see, every nature of subscription is different. So some subscription again are like for like OTT platforms. Some subscriptions are cars, and so what we have to realize is that what's important to the customer is very important to figure out during the subscription cycle. So generally, what we do is we kind of make subscription milestones like within the subscription cycle, and find out some milestone. For example, the person would have say used it X number of times by month one, right? And by month two, X plus delta, and so on and so forth. And that should give me a perfect path for renewal, something like that. So first we have to understand how people are using the subscription, and then see people who are renewing the subscription or getting upsold, what are the common traits between them, right? What are the path they are following? And if you make all the other people also kind of follow that part or a similar path, you will know that they are also now more likely to subscribe. So some of the key things I've already discussed before are, say, for example, the frequency of usage and the time for the time for which you have used a particular product. These are very common and very, very strong drivers. Other things are also in case of app-based subscription are how many times, say, for example, you're logging in onto the app, right? How is your behavior changing? For example, in the initial part of subscription, you were very enthused and you were browsing it again and again, and you felt like, I have given $1,000, let me watch all the movies under the sun. And then after time, that the enthu dipped down. So your energy towards the end of subscription also matters, right? So that is where the retention teams can come into play, and they keep you engaged, keep creating more content, and make sure you are you're stuck on the app. Yeah. So these are some of the points that come to mind in terms of retention.
Now in terms of monitoring these metrics or taking decisions based on these, so you must be using a lot of models for different purposes, right? So can you throw some light on the kind of models that you use regularly? I mean, not just you, but the entire team uh, at Zoomcar uses regularly to track these metrics and take informed decisions.
Yeah, so models are, I would divide into two parts. One is that we very closely monitors the life cycle metrics in a dashboard that are equally important. From a model point of view, which kind of gives us more accuracy at a user level, there are two models that we use generally. One is buy till you die models that kind of tells you that, in the next week, what is your propensity to come, a week after that, and, till what time will you sustain with us? And the other are basic churn propensity models that kind of tell you that at the end of the subscription, based on your behavior in the first few weeks, or people who have higher experience in subscription, what is your propensity to renew again? So I've seen that these two models work pretty good, because first of all, they also give you the importance of different features in that helps in attention. And now the features that helps in attention also can be divided into three parts. One are the features that we get to know very early. For example, the source from which you are acquired, the time that you took to subscribe, right? That your initial first week behavior, right? Your demographics. So this I know at the start. Then there are something that I will know in the middle or towards the fag end. For example, how is my retention, say month on month, if it's a yearly product, right? What is the dip or increase in or change in behavior in frequency of usage or time to use? So then these comes towards the middle path, right? So from these models we get insights on these variables which are more important, and then we decide accordingly which actions to take at the start of the journey, which actions to take in the middle of the journey, and so on.
Sure. Now, Chandramani, I have a different question for you because you have worked at Hyperpure. So I want to understand how did you use your data and algorithms to ensure high field rate and really low wastage
Okay.
uh, at
So
Hyperpure?
So basically, that comes into the part of like process automation, right? Uh, so for that, demand forecasting becomes very important. So you have to juggle between fill rates and your wastage. So one way to ensuring fill rates is that you actually overstock, right? And then you will be always be able to fulfill all customer orders, but that leads to wastage, especially in dairy and fruits and vegetables, those categories, right? So that's why you typically you invest in demand forecasting models, figure out, and the inputs to the demand forecasting. It's a very tricky problem to solve, though. It's not very easy problem because there are many different factors that could lead to your demand, right? One is your existing customer base, which to a decent degree you can actually approximate how much they are going to order, but you keep acquiring customers. So the new customer acquisition, where there is very hard way to know uh, a new customer has signed up and are they going to actually buy the entire basket from us or a specific few items, right? So but you try to build leverage some demographic information, some onboarding information to figure that out. So then you take into account the new customers. Seasonality is definitely there. Existing customer. Another thing that actually throws off demand forecasting quite a bit is that the marketing and sales teams are running campaigns, right? All of most of the time, maybe every 2 months there is a campaign to go into a new market or a new geography in an existing market and try to onboard customers, and that again that can actually just to give you a bump to your uh, demands, and that the fill rate goes down. So having a model which can actually account for all of these and tracking both the wastage and the fill rates and tweaking between that, so would be how you go about doing that. So we had like demand forecasting model build, which is was still evolving when I left, basically.
Sure. So actually, my the following question is only on the predictive analytics, which is more on the demand forecasting side. So just want to understand. So what's your overall take on the predictive analytics as a subset of the overall analytics data analytics field? So if you can help us like in what direction is it moving, or what could be the trends to follow into 2021
Exactly.
in terms of predictive analytics?
Predictive analytics, if you see, it's one of the oldest data intelligence areas, has been adopted by the industry for a long time, and that is something which was critical, will remain critical, and will continue to do so. Example of predictive analytics would be, again, as Arpit mentioned in the previous question, propensity models. Is a customer going to renew or churn? If the customer is going to renew, is it going to be just a straight conversion or an upsell or a cross sell, right? Are there signals for that? These are all examples of predictive models, and there are definitely challenges. Few challenges are around like as lead and lag indicators. So as data professionals who are developing these predictive models, I will talk about a bit of the indicators because I see this mistake as a pattern coming up. So someone develops a model and it's very highly accurate, right? The reason could be, and those are the pitfalls, is that you have put a lag indicator. Lag indicator would be something that, let's assume, we talk about churn prediction. Customer, you're trying to predict a customer is churn, and one of the features that you have used is a drop in adoption, maybe a 30% or 50% drop in adoption, right? Most of the time what would have happened is that the customer has already made his mind to go for a new offering. So that's why their adoption is increasing. If you have a lag indicator in your model, on your it will on your historical data it will perform very well. But once it goes into production in actual usage, it will stop working because the indicators are earlier. You have not stopped that. You are predicting churn, but those decisions you cannot revert. Your retention renewal teams cannot use that because the decisions have already been made. So there are few things to be careful of basically what kind of indicators are being used, are the models being monitored in production or not, and these kind of readiness. So if you see the trend of AI ops, which is kind of like DevOps for machine learning and all of those things, so that becomes very important, not just from a feature and scalability perspective, but also making sure that your predictive models are actually working in the real life environment, right? So defining robust metrics which can actually be measured, and then having a clear idea of what kind of indicators are being used would be something that the industry is right now trending towards, and that is the trend that will continue to be doubled down on.
Sure. Arpit, I mean, we all know, like in around March 2019, Zoomcar launched Zap program, which is like Zoomcar Associate program that offered an option to subscribe a car for a longer duration. Now, today, if we see, Zoomcar has more than 10,000 plus cars and operating across 45 countries. I'm curious to know, like, how data science helped Zoomcar capture 75% of the Indian market.
Okay, so when you
And
say,
I think 70% of them are millennials.
yeah, yeah, most of them, yeah. So these are the kind of people who would take out cars for road trips, and most of the time we have seen that after a certain point of time, people generally buy cars also, and that is why for those kind of people we had rolled out subscription, that you cannot have more agility in terms of your money and the choice of cars. Yeah, so you're talking about that, how did we go about capturing 75% market share? So there are a couple of things to it. First thing that helped us a lot is because we were in the first in the market. So that helped us a lot. This Zoomcar model started in 2013 when Greg and David, they were two co-founders who came to India, and they decided that there was a gap. There was no one providing a self-drive service like pay-per-use, and obviously first in the market gives you a kind of a boost, right? And also it is a asset-heavy business. It means that not anyone can come and start is it whenever they want. It's not as easy as just building an app. It's also a logistic based business, right? So this gives you a first boost, but that is only a first boost until unless your business models are strong and you're really solving a problem. You cannot achieve a good market share or a good word of mouth. So over time what has happened is that there has been a lot of analysis on what is important to the customer, what helps customer retain, what do they want in the journey, how can we make the journey very seamless. For example, the Zoomcar again was the first company to launch a keyless entry into the cars. It means that I do not need to have a person to give you the or handhold the car to you. You can just unlock the car through your app, and your key will be inside the dashboard, and when you return the car back you can keep the key inside the dashboard and lock the car through your app, right? So this again gave customers a lot of freedom and also reduced the operational cost for us. So because the operational costs were less, we were able to invest that money into, say, buying more cars or scaling to different markets, right? So this is another thing. The third thing is that when you grow, you have to figure out the how the demand patterns are. Where can you grow? Say you can grow within a city at a very high density, or you can grow across India or across countries. So that is also something that data science helps us to figure out, because we had spent a lot of time doing geospatial analytics, where we divided uh, the whole city or the country into small localized areas, and for each area we had mapped out what is the demand, what are the number of schools and colleges within a vicinity, because there was a very high correlation between the school colleges and customers adopting to Zoomcar. So slowly we started from a couple of cities and launched to like more than 45 cities in India. So this is how it has panned out. And after that, things like dynamic pricing. Now, dynamic pricing also helps you maintain the demand and also make money for the company whenever possible, right? Whenever the demands are less, the prices go down by themselves and your conversions increase, right? So that also helps you sustain the market share over time. So then next things are related to your spends, So there are a lot of attribution model that we have built, especially I remember we had built a Markov chains multi-touch attribution model to optimize our spends. So how much we should spend in, in which of the performance marketing channels. So that also helps us save a lot of money and get to the right set of customers. So it has been a journey, I would say, not just one thing that have worked for us.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, and then it came because it kept on improving and improving. So then we reached to a mark where we could capture 75% market share.
Sure. So I would like to understand specifically about the, since the lockdown started, because of this corona and all. So a lot of companies faced a lot of different challenges with their business, right? So I want to understand what were the data challenges, specifically data challenges that you faced in 2020, and because of the slowdown, and how did you basically overcome them?
So one of the biggest, I think, data challenges is one of the biggest was for all the models that we had built. So the models work on mostly on historical data and historical learnings. And when suddenly people stop using our app and they show irrational behavior, they go haywire. They don't understand how to read this pattern and is it good or bad for us. So that is when we realized, and it was not a like a gradual decline in the say number of sessions. It was a drastic decline. So imagine a churn propensity model. It would say that number of sessions have gone down, people on activity has gone down. It'll say everyone will churn out. But that is not the reality. The reality is that the macroeconomic factors are such that people are not doing it for the meanwhile, but they will do it in future. So then what we have to do is we have to reduce our training data sets to make it more realistic. Say, for example, instead of training it on 2 years, we would train it on the last 4 or 5 months so that we get more emphasis on the recent data. That is more practical. So these were the main data challenges. Obviously, the amount of data has also reduced, especially during the COVID time period, for us to understand. So because the usage of apps have reduced during that time period.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, so these were the main things I would say in the data side.
And sort of how did you overcome those? I mean, what kind of changes that you made in the models in order to adapt to these changes as well?
Yeah, so as I told, it's we had spent a considerable amount of time in reworking things out, right? And that goes without saying that we had to do it. Sometimes what happens is that models are in production, right? And sometimes the models are consumer facing. For example, dynamic pricing. Now, dynamic pricing, the model churns out some data and it directly impacts the conversions. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to monitor everything like day in and day out, how things are performing, even though the models have proven themselves before, right? Sometimes we also had to switch off models and move to rule based till we are convinced about the model's accuracy. Say, for example, instead of model predicting the price, we can do a rule based system that depending on the demand we are getting, we'll put some threshold, and above that threshold, we'll put a multiplier of price, things like those. So I would say we had to act street smart, take decisions on the spot, and maybe take hard decisions also at some point of time. There might be some inconveniences for the customers also because they would have seen a drastic change in, let's say, the prices or the way app functions. In fact, because your amount of data decrease, say app sessions decrease. So if you are spending a lot on your storage or other, you have scaled your system, so you had to scale down your systems also. So this was also an opportunity for companies to reduce costs. Yeah. So these are the main things.
Chandramani, for Hyperpure, what has been the case? I mean, there has been a lot of increase in the sale of grocery items during the lockdown. So I'm sure the case must have been exactly opposite uh, for you guys. So I
Yeah.
would like to understand what has been the challenges, data challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
So the first, so Hyperpure actually supplies to restaurants, right? And initially, when the lockdown came in, the rules were very stringent, and most of the hotels and restaurants were actually closed. And whichever way, so first week at least, once the policies got announced, and then there was a lot of confusion around there. So adoption was very very hard hit because of that. We did not know whether we could run our warehouses, our delivery trucks, and all of those things. But there was a lot of hustle by the business teams, and in a week we got an idea of, yeah, we can actually operate, and what is the SOP for that, right? After that, the first month of COVID was very challenging in the sense that we were seeing a lot of erratic behaviors. Uh, Many restaurants did not open. The ones which were like the cloud kitchens, let's assume a restaurant was buying only three uh, things from us, but because there are not many options available, he started ordering other categories, right? So that kind of opportunistic buying and wider adoption we saw, that was definitely there, and we struggled. Even our so that was the demand part of the equation. Supply side, again, reaching out to the vendors or farmers was a challenge, right? So for a month or so, the models were actually struggling because the demand has changed so much. We had, like, based upon demographics, we understood this kind of restaurants are only going to buy these three categories, right? So those features were built. We had to rebuild quite a few of them. So as Arpit mentioned, retraining was a big part, like monitoring and retraining the models on a smaller what you say historical data window was what we saw. And overall the demand went quite high. Over a period of time, after 2.5 months, actually our models improved quite a bit because uh, there were not much avenues to buy outside, and almost all restaurants were buying everything that was available on us. So we used to be running out of stock quite a bit, but we were able to predict that. So that was like very like the steps were very similar. You retrain your models, reduce the windows, scale down because initially at least the requests also went down, scale up as the demand come up. So these were the seeing things we saw actually. So Hyperpure actually did well apart from the first month which was chaotic. After that, as a business, Hyperpure actually did well. We almost tripled our numbers over the next 6 months till I was there.
Sure. I mean, during this COVID time and digitization, I mean, picked up really well. I mean, the businesses who were offline, they started their online presence. E-commerce picked up really well. So, I mean, and because of the digitization, a lot of competitors have emerged. So I would like to understand, like, because of the lot of competition, obviously everybody wants to be on top of the game, and I mean, and to react to the market analytics, I mean, we need to have a real time analytics in place, right? So for that, what we need is real time data.
True.
So I would like to understand, what's your secret sauce for real time analytics?
True. So real-time analytics, like not depends again. The context of real-time analytics also depends upon what kind of problem you are solving, right? So real-time, and is it external data? Real-time, and is it internal data that you are working with? Depending upon the needs, the approach changes. But and then there could be real-time data which the model is using it as a feedback and for online learning, right? So if you want to uh, change the model's behavior with food feedback, very less adopted, very few people are doing that online feedback. But it depends upon what kind of problem we are trying to solve for. And one of the things that we do for real-time data ingest is that, okay, we have our data lake, which is kind of lake, right, slow moving. So we have invested in feature stores wherever I have worked on to keep data. And it could be like your feature store is getting data from a Kafka cluster, almost near real time. You are keeping the data updated and using that for making those product predictions. But it will depend quite a bit based upon what kind of real time problem and what kind of use case you are trying to solve for.
Sure. So what's your take on this, Arpit?
Yeah, I think I agree with Money. So in what we have seen is, in most of the cases, not really real time is needed. Okay, because only, for example, in cases of I believe the projects I've worked on, dynamic pricing was almost near real time, right? And things like, we also developed driver score, that was also near real time, right? And we had used mostly built Kafka pipelines, and use all the AWS tools, best of the kitty available, to automate that, like ingestion, processing, and then pushing it onto the product. So we had built that, and we kind of achieved a latency of around 15 seconds. But it is difficult to go beyond that, like millisecond, microsecond. It becomes very, very expensive. Right? So sometimes we have to see whether it's required or not. So even if a customer sees a price that was determined 15 seconds earlier, it will more or less be similar to what you will show even after 1 second. So I would say that we don't try to do near real time for everything, because it exponentially increases the cost. Plus, it doesn't solve an incremental problem at a very large level. But yeah, for things that are, say, between 15 seconds to 15 minutes, you would, depend on building good data architectures for our production models to achieve that.
Sure. So before we move on to the question and answer session, one last question I have for you. So in your perspective, like what is the future of data analytics in the subscription business? And what are the top data analytics trends that you see emerging in 2021?
Okay, so maybe I'll just start with that.
Sure.
So what I see is that, let me talk about the subscription business trends first. So I think uh, in most of the things, subscription might come in, more or less in future, because both the companies have realized that it's good to have both type of business models, traditional plus subscription together, so that there is some certainty, or there is some predictable future for you, right? Especially after people have seen COVID times, people who were on subscription were better off. Trust me. Like even for Zoom car, people who had already taken cars and blocked their money, so they were obliged to pay, because they could use the car. So that way it is better off for everyone, and plus customers also get a better deal, right? So because the amount of subscription businesses will go up, right, obviously the data for subscriptions will go up, and the analysis required for it will also go up, right? But the way the analytics for subscription is executed and traditional business executed is a little different. As you also discussed in one of your initial questions, what are the key KPIs that we should monitor for subscription versus traditional? So those KPIs, if the companies adopt, so the data team would have to understand those KPIs and adopt to them early in the cycle, start monitoring it, and I would see that those things will take up more of the bandwidth for data analytics team to build on. Yeah, so yeah, this is more or less, this is my take on how data analytics will shape.
Chandramani, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so basically, like in terms of the overall trend, definitely agree with Harpreet. Subscription is going to be is already growing, and almost all parts of the economy you will see advents of subscription, and which will definitely increase the need for data analytics professionals. One challenge is that is basically, now you can say the data analytics or data science machine learning is heading towards maturity, right? In terms of practice by itself, it has been around for a long time, but wide adoption, that wide adoption is moving towards maturity, and there are few challenges with that whenever anything becomes mature. So if you I'm not sure, like many people would be able to relate, but uh, I take an example almost always of manual testing, QA practices, and how they were 20 years of even 10 years back, and how they have evolved. And automation is a big part of that. That's how the QA functions have evolved, and mostly now you have automated QA suites, and then SDET is actually maintaining that. The manual QA as a job profile has actually become much less now, right? And that's the key part. Like once the entire quality assurance part matures, you need automation, you need this thing. Same thing needs to happen with the data science profession to actually be considered mature and at that particular at level of maturity. But there are challenges with that. The challenges are that okay, the models itself, okay, we keep hearing articles about auto ML and out of the box training, but they still don't work. right? So where I see the challenge is that the practice itself is heading towards maturity, broad adoption, but few benchmarks that are needed to reach that, right? Because of the nature of the work that we are doing, right? uh, it will not meet those benchmarks. We will not have a lot of automation in. There are still efforts on automation. Some are succeeding, but the level of automation required, we will not be able to. The trends seem to be on that sense. We will not be able to. And how does that play out? Would be interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. Thanks, Arpit. Thanks, Chandramani, for sharing these insights. Okay, now it's time for Q&A. If you have any questions, then you can write them in the Q&A window available on your screen. Meanwhile, let me read out some of the questions that we have received. Uh, so first is, for Arpit, how did you use your data analytics to drive personalization and customer experience at Zoomcar?
Okay, so I'll touch upon the customer experience first. So in customer experience, two things are important. First is to record customer experience, and you need to, there are a couple of things there also. You need to ask the right questions that you want an answer to. Experience can either just be, how do you feel, would you recommend my company on scale of 0 to 10? That also tells you experience. How would you rate me in 1 to 5? That also will tell you experience, right? But the real meat is when you ask the right questions on why your experience is lower, why your experience is high, right? So we had spent a lot of time in understanding, first talking to customers. Say, for example, if someone gives us a low rating, we would have a call center who would make out, say, 100 calls to that low rating customers and try to understand deeper reasons behind that, right? So those deeper reasons would then be framed as questions and asked to a lot more people if they are also facing the same problem, and that would tell us kind of the truth, right? Those would be executed through surveys, say through SurveyMonkey, or they are in-app surveys also right now, usually some of the tools that we had used, where when a person is browsing or at the end of the funnel, you would prompt a question and with the right option. So we spent a lot of time in consumer research in understanding the reasons behind that. So sometimes I remember we were doing a survey on retention, and we were asking a question to people that, would you return back, when will you purchase, how was your experience? And a lot of people would say, yeah, I'll book. Yeah, everyone would say that, but they will never actually end up booking. So these are like more like symptoms, right? So we need to diagnose what is the problem. So instead of just letting them go away with "I will book again," we used to probe them. For example, how was the pickup of your ride? Did you face any problems? Did you reach on time? Did you face any problems between? Sometimes customer needs aid to tell you the right insights, right? So that is what we understood, and this is how we structured our feedbacks. Second thing was that we made customer experience as our KRA for the company, like in our OKRs, that even though you achieve your business, but your customer experience should also increase, or at least should not decrease over time. Because sometimes what happens is, so say for example, I do dynamic pricing and I make more money, but at the end people feel that they are unhappy because they did not have any choice. They would end up paying, but they are unhappy with it. So customer experience is a leading indicator for retention. So my retention would go down, experience would go down now. Even if I make money at this point of time, I would know that my retention will decrease. My experience has gone down. So these are, I think, all the small things that we intervened and did, and especially in Zoomcar, it was a very wide business in terms of experience, because there were too many customer touch points, from booking to picking up the car to making sure the car is clean, filling the checklist, right, taking images, going on a ride, facing any problem, returning back the car, getting your security deposit, right? So we had customer experience surveys at each touch point. So yeah, so this is how it was measured and improved over time.
Sure. So next question is for Chandramani. So from data and analytics point of view, what are the key things that a founder should consider while starting a new subscription business or switching to a subscription model?
Mhm, mhm. Okay. Yeah. So basically, few things that needs to be invested on early, right? If you talk about business, so there is a saying of 360 view of a customer, right? So let's assume you are starting a new consumer subscription business, and you have to understand this, right? So how do you figure that out? So investing in building a 360 degree view of your customer is becomes very critical. The 360-degree view will encompass things like uh, how was the onboarding experience, as you mentioned, right? So there are few stages when a subscription life cycle of a subscription. One is that, okay, you sell the subscription, then the subscription is adopted, right? Then you make it regular, the usage from adoption phase, you make it to actually they have adopted and use, and then you could have renewal, churn, uh, y- uh, or an upsell that could potentially happen. So that's the life cycle. To understand, so you should have a chart for that, a life cycle of a customer, define it well according to your context, right? If you're selling a SaaS for example, right? So your adoption, what is the time to value, TTV? So with adoption you generate a TTV and monitor that. TTV should not be very high. If the sooner they get value out of your subscription of your software, the longer they are going to be with you. So having that life cycle and metric around that, then building a 360 where you are looking at adoption, you are looking at feedback of customer from survey or support cases, and then you are monitoring the demographic information, learning from that, have targeting your marketing campaigns based upon. So let's assume now 6 months have been there, you have a few early adopters, you know which type of customers are getting value from your software, which are not, right? So then you can use this input to target your marketing campaigns. At least in the initial journey, you want to be razor focused on only acquiring customers which you know are going to be successful with you. Otherwise it's burn, you spend money acquiring them and next year they will not be with you, so you lose money. So these are a few things that you have to be focused on, and that's where data analytics helps a lot. Measuring the life cycle stages, how the customer is performing, measuring adoption scores, measuring satisfaction scores, and then building it on from there forward.
Absolutely. Sure.
And
Uh,
I might need to drop in next couple of
yes.
minutes.
Yes. I think that's it for the session.
Okay.
So if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions about this event, then please write to me at Parag, Parag, @hebodata.com. We are hosting our next panel discussion on 25th Feb on the topic growth recipe, advanced analytics for startups. So please check our website for more details and you can register there. So see you for our next session. Till then, take care and stay safe.